We've accumulated a few stories here for you about the boys that we lost in wartime. I've also dragged out some of the annual reports from the First War. We haven't got much in that respect, but also the Second War. How the club viewed the men that enlisted and went off to wartime that had played here. But also the club points out in the newsletters why they resolved to keep playing games of football here while war was happening, because they felt gave people that were here a chance to escape from the rigours of wartime, and they felt it was in the interest of morale that the game kept going. Not all clubs did. Geelong was one of the clubs that withdrew in the Second World War, and there were a couple of players that were at Geelong that were loaned to Carlton and played for Carlton until the war ended and Geelong was readmitted, and then they went back to play for Geelong. One player, George Neal, won a best and fairest here for Carlton, having been given leave from Geelong, and another player, Jim Knight, played about 5 games here but then was killed in war, never made it back. So there's a lot of really interesting individual stories here from the men we lost. There might be some areas here that might be of interest to you. This is from the annual report of 1915. So the club had won premierships in 1914 and 15. So 15 was a premiership year, but it was also about the time we started losing players to the war effort. So you can see here a little bit about how the club portrayed it, and the players here that are on active service. Fen McDonald had already been killed in wartime, as we see there. Stan McKenzie didn't make it back, nor did Dave Gillespie, and that's a photo of Dave Gillespie, Carlton footballer. Dave's twin brother Doug was a premiership player here, and Dave played a handful of games. He got badly wounded in the Great War, came back severely wounded and died in the military hospital in Caulfield. And when he died, he was buried with his mother in Coburg Cemetery. I mentioned to you that we lost 12 men in the First War. It was 11 for a long time. And we only found out about Albie Patterson probably within the last 5 years. The issue was that we'd always had Albie listed on our books as Albie Patterson with 2 T's, but it was 1 T. And we found out that Albie Patterson, with 1 T, played for Carlton, served in the Great War, made it back and died of injuries not long after the war ended. These are other photographs of our men that we lost. Willie Rogers. A great photo of him in his Carlton uniform, full kit, and only played a handful of games, never made it back. Other areas I'd like to share with you, Jordan. There's a letter here that came back to Carlton, to Harry Bell, the secretary of the club. This is in 41, written by Jim Park. So Jim Park was that man there, Carlton premiership player in 38, and then went off to war. I often think of all you good chaps at the club and the happy times we had together. Come on the Blues, yours sincerely, Jim. So that was a signing off letter in 41. Now, in February 43, New Guinea, Jim was killed with a lot of his mates there. He's buried in the cemetery up at a place called Wau in New Guinea. This is him in full flight in the 30s. This photograph was actually a famous photograph. Jimmy Clark, an old player, said to me that when he played at Carlton, this photograph was prominent on the walls of the club rooms. It was a famous mark, and it went worldwide. He said in the days when we didn't have mobiles, but it still went out on telegraph and whatever. And Jim told me the story that in 43, the secretary walked into the rooms and said to him, "Listen, Jim, we've just heard that Jim Park's been killed in New Guinea fighting the Japanese. We want you to wear his number 26. And Jim Clark said, I was sort of taken aback. He said it was incredible honour, and it was under very sad circumstances in the Guernsey, but Jimmy Clark ended up being a Carlton premiership player and a best and fairest for the club, wearing Jim's old number 26. And over at not far from where we are now, there's a stone memorial to the soldiers, which you might have seen. When that was first unveiled, Jim's daughter came back to unveil the stone, and she said that day, I always remember it, she said, look, when my dad was killed in war, she said, I was 2. She said, I have no memory at all of my father. She said, but I'm very grateful the club's seen fit to honour my father's memory in this way. And this is a photograph you might have seen. That's your great uncle.
Is it?
Yeah, so that was his wartime file photograph.
Yeah, right.
I'm not sure if you'd seen it.
I have not seen that, no.
Okay.
That's pretty cool.
It is cool. And we've got...
He still looked, it looked very much like that, yeah. There you go. I know, he was a similar age to me. I think he might have been a bit younger.
Right.
Than I was.
Yeah.
He sent me, I've got a lot of letters from him talking about it, and when he decided to join up, he said he couldn't follow orders, so he wasn't going to make a good soldier. So he thought he'd join the Air Force, and he actually trained out in Point Cook, flying Tiger Moths, which is the little biplanes. He said he crash landed that, put it on its roof, ended up in hospital, and then after training for that was sent to England and joined the RAF, not the RAAF, as a pilot. But if you actually Google 578, the photo that they use on Wikipedia, it's my uncle and his crew. He's there in the cap. Flew, I can't quite remember if it was 43 or 33 operations, which is a fair few. So he said that the average for a pilot back then was 3. So he flew quite a few. And then after that became a teacher, which is almost more dangerous than flying on active service. But he crash landed a few times, had to do what's called a belly landing without wheels, and ended up in hospital a few times. Always remember the story that he told of meeting the Queen. The lady behind the thing, behind the bar said, "Oh, I've got 2 tickets to this show. Would you guys be interested?" And they're like, "Oh, we're not doing anything today." Yeah, yeah, all right, we'll go. And she said, like, "I'm serious. You have to go to this show if you're gonna go." And like, "Oh, all right, no worries." So they rock up to the Royal Albert Hall in the UK, and they're sitting in the Queen's box. And they're like, "Oh, how good's this?" Sit down, and next minute, everyone in the venue turns around to start applauding, and he turns to his mate, "Oh, look at all these people applauding us. How good's this?" And then the Queen's mother, her sister, came in and sat directly in front of him and his mate.
But you said that it wasn't until later in his life that he started to talk a little bit about his wartime service.
Yeah,
it must have been pretty painful for him.
Yeah, it was quite hard to talk about. He opened up a fair bit about some of the stuff that happened, but not too much, and it took about 60 years to get back on a plane. So yeah, it would have been definitely difficult. But yeah, he was very funny. I was fortunate enough to meet him a few times, and he was a Carlton supporter as well, which is quite nice. He
was recognised for his contributions through the Second World War.
Yeah, he won a few medals. Obviously, won the Medal of Victory, and I've seen him. But the highest one he won was a Distinct Flying Cross, which is the highest you can win as a pilot, like a airman, and receive that off the King. But yeah, he said he met the King, and King had a stutter and was really nervous and had like sweaty hands, which I thought was pretty crazy. Yeah. And then I can't remember what year, but won the highest order of the French might have been 2016 or 2018 from the French embassy in Australia as well. So
you must be incredibly proud of him.
Yeah, no, definitely. He always sent me like newspaper clippings of stuff when they had reunions and stuff, and would always cross the word out hero, because they would say hero's return, but every time he was mentioned a hero, he'd always cross it out saying he was in the right place at the right time, sort of thing. So he's very humble about it.
And sometimes returned servicemen too, they have feelings of guilt that they actually made it back when a lot of their mates didn't.
Yeah.
Which is probably the wrong way to feel, but probably understandable.
Yeah,
also.
I've gone through quite a fair bit, so it's probably understandable.
Do you think your great uncle's story helps put your own life in perspective a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. It's pretty wild that what he went through, just the bravery that these men showed, men and women really showed throughout all the conflicts is pretty crazy, and just hearing stories of what they went through and seeing photos and pictures of where they were fighting is pretty crazy.
I wanted to just end, if I may, Jordan, with sharing the 45 annual report.
Yeah.
So this was the year of the Bloodbath Grand Final, and
Yeah.
one of the great contradictions about that Bloodbath game, how vicious and brutal it was here, was it actually resulted in Carlton winning the premiership in the year of peace and victory.
Yeah.
And in that particular game here, 63,000 people were here. A lot of returned servicemen and women were in the crowd.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Clark, I mentioned before, played in that game for Carlton.
Yeah.
And he said he can recall bumping into a returned serviceman in the car park after the 45 bloodbath and saying to the soldier, "What did you make of that?" To which the soldier replied, "I thought I was at the wrong bloody war."
Yeah, right.
It was a pretty tough game, but as you notice in the front cover, the year of peace and victory is emblazoned on the front, and yet inside we still remember the boys we lost. Lieutenant Jim Park, Wolf Atkinson, reported missing in 43, and Jim Knight, who died on active service in October of 43. So Carlton wasn't untouched by war.
Yeah.
Like so many institutions and places, they lost men.
The captain was Bob Chitty?
Captain of the club was Bob Chitty,
yeah.
correct.
Because his brother, I've read that book, the Chitty Brownlow.
The Changi Brownlow medal.
Yeah,
the Changi
Brownlow,
Brownlow medal, he won.
Yeah,
That's right.
I've read that book.
And he did, I think, make it back from war, but there was another of Bob Chitty's brothers, Arthur, who didn't make it back. So again, there was a family that was really impacted by war.
Yeah.
As was yours.
Yeah, because I remember reading that book as many years ago, because they're from where Mum and Dad grew up. So yeah, reading that, and then obviously now being here is pretty crazy. Every year, well, the first year I did it, I picked a Carlton player to speak about and acknowledge that served and didn't make it back, and then told my story with my great uncle. And then the next year, continued on with that. So each year I get one of the boys just to talk about a bit of family connection. And last year had Sam Durden speak, who obviously shares a relative with Corey Durden as well. So they spoke a little bit about that, and then picked another player, and I actually picked Jim Park last year to speak about. And then we'll be doing the same this year. I picked Alf Williamson.
Who's the great uncle, I believe, of Gary Ablett Sr.
Yeah, I did read that in the Blueseum.
All power to you, and I've got to commend you for your idea to have red poppies placed by the names of the players that we lost on the player wall down to the rooms.
Yeah, I can't take full credit for that. It was what Manso suggested it, and then I thought that was a great idea as well. And yeah, spoke to the right people, and it looks like we'll get that done as well, which is a great idea. So that'd be cool to walk past every day, and the boys can identify them pretty quickly, and just to remember them and their sacrifice.
All power to you, Jordan. Good luck for the weekend, and do it for Donald.